In a decision with sweeping consequences, the Supreme Court has struck down controversial tariffs from the Trump era, ending a years-long legal battle over presidential authority in trade. The ruling, delivered today, August 7, 2025, signals that the executive branch's power to impose economic measures under a national emergency is not without limits. This verdict marks a pivotal moment for U.S. trade relations, redefining how economic power is wielded from the White House. The case centered on the president's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, to justify the tariffs, a move now deemed an overreach. The court's decision reasserts Congress's constitutional role in international trade, fundamentally altering the rules of global commerce. For American businesses, especially those reliant on international supply chains, the removal of these tariffs brings long-awaited relief and a chance for stability. The ruling closes a contentious chapter in trade policy, but opens new questions about the future of American economic strategy. By setting a precedent on IEPA's limits, the Supreme Court has drawn a line for all future administrations. Presidents will now need to work more closely with Congress to enact significant trade policies, shifting the balance of power in Washington. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that using IEPA to justify the Liberation Day tariffs exceeded presidential authority. The majority opinion, authored by Chief Justice Roberts, emphasized that IEPA was never meant to serve as a tool for broad, long-term trade policy outside genuine emergencies. The court ordered the immediate cessation of the tariffs, setting the stage for economic readjustment. The justices clarified that chronic trade imbalances do not meet the emergency threshold required by IEPA. Dissenting justices warned the ruling could limit future presidents' ability to respond to economic threats, highlighting deep divisions over executive power. The Department of Commerce and Customs must now halt tariff collections, directly impacting importers and opening the door to possible refund claims. This decision will immediately reconfigure the flow of billions in international trade. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, was designed to let presidents act swiftly in true emergencies, like freezing assets of hostile regimes. Using IEPA for broad long-term tariffs was a novel and controversial move, stretching the definition of emergency. Critics argued this bypassed Congress and violated the separation of powers. The administration claimed persistent unfair trade practices posed an extraordinary threat, justifying emergency action. The Supreme Court rejected this broad interpretation, clarifying that IEPA is not a blank check for reshaping trade policy. The ruling reaffirms Congress's primary constitutional power to regulate foreign commerce. Future presidents will need to rely on more specific statutes or seek new legislation for major trade actions. This marks a significant recalibration of presidential power in economic matters. The Liberation Day tariffs targeted a wide range of imports, from electronics to raw materials, impacting nearly every sector of the U.S. economy. The administration argued these tariffs were necessary to rebalance trade and protect American industries from unfair foreign practices. Supporters saw them as a tough negotiating tool. Critics called them attacks on American businesses and consumers. Data showed costs were absorbed domestically, raising prices and disrupting supply chains. Retaliatory tariffs from trading partners hurt American exporters, especially in agriculture. The legal challenge focused on both economic harm and the constitutional question of executive overreach. Opponents argued the president was unilaterally levying taxes, a power reserved for Congress. The Liberation Day tariffs became a symbol of divisive trade policy, their fate ultimately decided by the Supreme Court. Today's ruling ends this controversial chapter and sets a new precedent for future trade actions. The legal battle began with thousands of U.S. importers challenging the Liberation Day tariffs in lower courts, arguing they were imposed outside proper legal procedures. The case moved to the Court of Appeals, focusing on whether the president could use IEPA to implement tariffs not authorized by other trade laws. The business coalition warned unchecked presidential power would render Congress's trade role meaningless. The government argued the president needed flexibility to protect economic interests in a fast-changing world. The Supreme Court's decision to hear the case signaled its importance for executive power and trade policy. Amicus briefs from business groups and legal scholars highlighted the broad impact. At the Supreme Court, the core issue was the constitutional balance between Congress and the president in trade matters. The justices' ruling now restores that balance, limiting unilateral executive action. This case will shape the boundaries of presidential authority for years to come. The Supreme Court's majority opinion dismantled the administration's justification for the tariffs, setting a higher bar for invoking IEPA. The ruling makes clear that presidential power in foreign affairs is not absolute, especially when it overlaps with Congress's authority over commerce. Future presidents must now show a direct, urgent link between a declared emergency and their actions. This decision curtails the use of emergency declarations for broad economic policy, pushing presidents to work with Congress. Laws like the Trade Act of 1974, with stricter requirements and oversight, will become more relevant. The ruling empowers Congress to reclaim authority ceded to the executive over decades. However, presidents may seek other legal avenues for trade actions, leading to new legal battles. The decision reinforces the principle of separated powers and sets a precedent for genuine emergencies only. It will be studied as a key moment in the ongoing debate over executive authority. The Supreme Court's decision immediately lifts a major cost burden from American businesses, especially those relying on imported components. Lower input costs could mean lower prices for consumers and greater competitiveness for U.S. firms. Small and medium-sized enterprises hit hardest by the tariffs will feel the most relief. The end of the tariffs may gradually reduce prices on everyday goods, boosting household purchasing power. Internationally, the ruling is likely to ease tensions with U.S. trading partners and open the door to renewed cooperation. However, some domestic industries may now face tougher competition from imports. The government may need to support workers and businesses affected by this shift. Years of tariffs have permanently altered supply chains, and businesses must adapt to the new landscape. The economic reality post-ruling will require careful navigation by all stakeholders. The administration defended the tariffs as essential to its economic strategy, arguing IEEPA gave the president broad authority to protect American jobs. This stance resonated with voters concerned about globalization, but the prolonged legal fight created deep uncertainty. Businesses delayed investments and restructured supply chains, wary of the tariffs' future. The uncertainty stifled economic growth and strained international relationships, as trading partners retaliated and negotiations stalled. The Supreme Court's decision brings clarity, but the memory of instability lingers. The administration must now craft a new trade strategy without IEPA as a tool. It's unclear if this will lead to more negotiation or alternative protectionist measures. Businesses and global partners are watching closely for the White House's next move. While the legal question is settled, America's broader economic direction remains uncertain. The Supreme Court's decision to overturn the Liberation Day tariffs is a foundational ruling, redefining presidential power and U.S. trade policy. By limiting the use of IEPA for broad tariffs, the court reasserts Congress's primary role in foreign commerce. The verdict will lower costs for many businesses and consumers, but may expose some industries to more competition. Politically, it forces a recalibration of power between the White House and Congress, making unilateral tariffs harder to impose. The ruling signals a shift toward a more stable, rules-based trade approach, potentially repairing strained alliances. The world will watch to see if this legal change leads to lasting policy shifts. The administration's next steps will determine if this is a true turning point in U.S. economic engagement. The Supreme Court has clarified the limits of presidential power, but the debate over America's trade strategy is far from over. With one major tool restricted, future leaders must navigate the complexities of global trade with new strategies.